So if we don't know about this motivation, the doom-seeking motivation, which we can also equate to extrinsic motivation, which is the motivation that comes from outside of us, or the motivation that comes from the thinking mind. So if we don't know about that, and we don't know about the crazy train, which is the conditioned identity, then imagine how confusing it is for us to try and make sense of the world and try and move in a direction that results in us being less miserable or less neurotic or less disconnected from reality. It's obviously completely impossible for us to get anywhere at all. And this is the situation that we actually are in. We are actually completely unaware of the doom-seeking motivation. Not only are we unaware that there is any such thing as the doom-seeking motivation, we are unaware that this type of motivation has very neatly substituted itself for our true volition, such that when we do function on the basis of extrinsic motivation and we say, I want this, I want that, it's actually the doom-seeking motivation that is saying that, not us. So if you wanted to invent a completely jinxed situation, then it would be impossible to produce anything more jinxed than this. On the one hand, we have the mind-created identity, which is the same thing as the ego construct, of course, which not only is it not who we are, but also when we imagine that it is who we are, this makes it impossible for us to ever know or perceive or have any insight at all into our true nature. So not only do we have this this identity, we also have the motivation that goes along with it, which is a good old doom-seeking motivation, i.e. the security-seeking motivation, which is the motivation for this idea of ourselves to dig itself in more and more, to consolidate itself more and more. And we are colluding in this motivation of the conditioned identity as much as we're able. We've put all our money on it. So it is as if to say that whatever benefits the conditioned identity will benefit us. And so we put everything we've got into consolidating the position of the conditioned identity. We imagine that this is going to pay dividends, that it's going to come up like a jackpot for us. And we call this jackpot winning. This is the glorious mirage that we're aiming at. The mirage of winning or succeeding, or whatever word we want to use, is what that means is that the conditioned identity gets to be super consolidated so that it never has any more worries. It's actually done and dusted. It's going to be fixed up and secured in perpetuity. It's like being an all-time winner. This is a big win. Once we manage this, we don't have to carry on struggling to win anymore. So this is a super mirage, a super attractive illusion that we're gunning for. This is what doom-seeking behavior is all about, trying to obtain this thing. And this thing that we're trying to obtain absolutely has to stay an illusion, because what we're essentially trying to do is say that the conditioned identity, get to the point where the conditioned identity is actually really who we are, that it's a real thing, it becomes really true, rather than just some construct of thought. So that's a nice idea. Well, it seems like a nice idea from the point of view of the conditioned identity, which is not really our point of view, but it's the point of view that we're going along with out of our passivity. It seems like a good idea, but it isn't, because a thing that is not true can never be made true, no matter how much work you put into it. And so the very, very basis of extrinsic motivation, when we strip it down, is the attempt to make that which is not true, true. And when we put it like that, we can see that it's not exactly the most hopeful of ventures. We can see that it's actually a doomed venture. It's not something that we really want to invest in when we see it like that. But of course, we can't see it like that. And that's the whole point of doom-seeking behavior. We absolutely can't see it for what it is. And if someone were to come and try and explain it to us, they might as well be speaking Cantonese to us, or Dutch, or Swahili, or some language that we don't understand, because it's not going to make sense to our brain. It won't compute. We look at them, and if we're polite enough, we'll try to listen, but it won't make any sense. This is the conditioned identity's blind spot. Any talk about it only being a conditioned identity, only a construct of thought, only an arbitrary way of looking at things that we've got so familiar with and used to that we actually think it's the only viewpoint possible. Whatever way we want to talk about it, that is the conditioned identity's blind spot, because it can't make sense of that type of talk. It can't make sense of the type of talk that relativizes it. Everything it does, in everything it does, it assumes its own absolute existence. It doesn't even think. Or when I'm identified with the conditioned identity, I don't even think I'm going to assume that this identity is absolute, has absolute existence. I just do it. I never think about it. I never reflect on the fact that that's what I'm doing. So everything depends on whether we can get some other viewpoint on on matters, and whether we can look at what's going on in some other way, some way that has nothing to do with the conditioned identity, some way which isn't the official way. And so we all know that when there is an official way, it's very hard to go against it, because people will be shocked and will be penalized, anything we come out with is going to be devalidated instantly. We're going to be made to feel like fools, or maybe made to feel like we're actually bad. So the official way has this huge power to it, and the official way is the way of the conditioned identity. It has this huge authority, this huge coercive power. A huge coercive power that is supported by every other person who is also identified with the conditioned identity, which makes up a lot of people, makes up most people. And so the combined coercive power that we're talking about here is absolutely immense. To try not to believe what is believed by this generic mind is so audacious. We might try it out, but instantly we feel like we ourselves feel that we must be fools to be going against it. It's very hard to not censor ourselves and step back in line to being a loyal slave of the system. And that's what conditioning is all about. That's what social conditioning is all about as well. So we have this situation where any talk that there might be about mental health is completely meaningless unless all of this business about doom-seeking motivation and the crazy train of the ego construct, unless that's understood, we can't say anything about mental health, because what we're talking about when we do talk about mental health is merely the health of the ego construct. And the health of the ego construct is, as I've just said, totally linked with the ego construct's overall aim, which is to be not an ego construct but real. So that's how it sees health, making the something not true be true. That's what it sees as being healthy. So it's not really very obviously healthy, because for one, it's impossible, and for two, if it were possible, or if we were to imagine that it is the case, then that would be the worst possible thing, because it involves the very thoroughgoing denial of our true nature. So in other words, the mental health that we're talking about is actually an inverted form of health. It's like doublespeak. When we say health, what we really mean is the worst possible situation, the most perverse situation that we could possibly put ourselves in. That's what we think of. So we're already in denial of our true nature, and we're seeking this bizarre form of mental health, which would mean we're even more in denial of our true nature, so much so that we'll never know about it, because it's been crushed forever, or silenced forever, or murdered, as we could also say, which isn't possible, because the unreal cannot ever eliminate the real, but it can do a damn good job of trying, incredibly good job of trying. And we're hooked in there with it, so we're colluding with the trying, and the trying is us, actually, because it's us that do all the work. It's us that sweat and get stressed out and go through all the suffering and anguish that comes about as a result of us inextricably linking our fortunes with the self-construct, or the ego construct. So, having said this, we get to the point where we could consider, well, okay, so What's not therapeutic is chasing the false idea of health. That's actually doublespeak. It actually means the opposite. It's like the ministry of peace or the ministry of truth. So if pursuing that ideal is the opposite of mental health, does that mean that we can figure out what we have to do in order to be not falling into that trap and freeing ourselves from that trap? And in a way, it definitely does seem that having understood everything that's been said so far, it does seem that we can put it together in our heads and say, okay, so what do I do? What things are they that I can do to not fall into the trap of identifying with the ego construct? And the problem with that very natural question is, of course, that it is the ego construct that's asking it. The ego construct is asking, what can I do to be free from the ego construct? And we don't in any way see this because this conditioned identity is such a habit to us that even when we gain a certain amount of awareness, perhaps, that it isn't who we are and that it's only a kind of it's kind of like something that's been imposed on us, something that we've been told we are, but which we aren't. Even after that moment of awareness, before we know it, we've fallen back to the default position of thinking that that is who we are and wondering about how we can go about rectifying matters or putting things right again. And one thing we find really, really hard to understand is we can't really talk about things that we can do, even though we love having things that we can do. We can't talk about anything that we can do because everything we do purposefully, on purpose, via calculation, is done by the rational self. So even as soon as we start doing stuff, straight away we fall back into the trap. And if I attempt to stop doing stuff, then my attempt to stop doing stuff is also a doing. And so it's also the rational self which is doing this. It's got another goal, the goal of having no goals, the goal of not doing things. What therapy would consist of, what would constitute therapy, is a very tricky question. And it's not at all as simple as the ideas that we do have about therapy, where we have the idea that there's a goal and a particular way or method to get to that goal. Like the way Wu Wei says, all methods belong to the I concept. So when we see that, we realize just how radical a departure a movement into genuine mental health would be. It's like moving into a dimension that we can't even conceive of. Okay, thanks for watching.